This conference will
went on
now be
foundation.
recorded.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, hi everyone. My name is Archana Haylock. I apologize for my voice. Been struggling a little bit with being ill, but I wanted to welcome everybody to our first Advanced Cooling Solutions call. This sub-project kind of came as an outcry from our community, and that's usually how sub-projects are, first formed, where there's a need from the community and they come and, approach the foundation as well as, some of the other project leads. And then Bill and I decide where is the best place for this project to reside. So we decided that it was going to be as part of our Rack and Power project community, which is why Steve, Bills, and Caleb are running this for the time being. Again, please, if you don't know, if you haven't signed up for the mailing list, please sign up for the mailing list. Please spread the word about this project, because the more participants we have, the more successful the project will be. As Steve will go through the call today, there might be several work streams within this project group, and we'll try to figure those out as the project proceeds. But thank you again. One last thing, we are having our European Summit on October 1st and 2nd in Amsterdam. This particular topic is very near and dear to the European community as well as to the Asian community. And so there will be a lot of conversation around this. If you are planning on attending, please do register, as registration is now open, and take a look at the schedule and get familiar with it. All the information is available on the opencompute.org website under events, and it's our regional summit. So that's pretty much it. Back to you, Steve.
Okay, thank you, Archana. Since quite a few of the people that are involved are new to Open Compute, maybe your company's been participating a while, but some of the participants here will be new. I'm just going to go through some kind of ways that we choose to kind of collaborate through Open Compute projects. So first of all, like Archana is saying, it's a mailing list. The mailing list is the primary method that we use to distribute information and collaborate amongst all of us. That's where all of the agenda items come from. That's where you'll see the notes. We ask questions of each other. That's where stuff gets kind of driven through the community. We will have meetings such as this set up for everybody to meet virtually. So, OCP is a worldwide organization, so there's not going to be a perfect time for everybody, whether it's Asia and the North America or Europe. It's going to be an inconvenient time for somebody. So we can set these calls up as the bulk of the participants. If we get 75% of the participants from Asia and the U.S., we can set those times accordingly, so it's more convenient for that particular group of people to communicate. But there's also going to be times when people are traveling and they just can't actually get onto these calls. So I just want you to know that all the calls are recorded. We're recording this call right now. There will be links on the wiki that I will send out through the mailing list. It only takes a couple of days before I get those links from the foundation. So you can listen to all of the discussion that goes on, even if you can't participate live. The information is still there. There are notes. So if you look in the chat window, I just put out the Google Doc that we're going to be using to drive the notes on the call, where we'll keep track of what we talked about, and the action items, how we're going to what we're going to be doing next. Those will of course also be sent out to everybody so they can see what went on and topics and presentations. We're going to poll, hopefully we'll have those presentations the day before so people can review those before we talk about them publicly. So there's lots of ways to participate. And again, if you're entering, you will mute yourself if you're not actually talking. That will help reduce the amount of background noise that we have from everybody. So from an agenda item today, we've got, we're going to start off by talking about the charter and the project scope. So let me bring it up real quick so you can kind of see what we showed previously. And let's see, this is the document that Bill Carter, the CTO, put together for us.
Hey, Steve, Bill is on the call as well, I think.
Okay. Hi, Bill. All right, let's share my screen here real quick. All right, Michael, I'm going to take over from you. Okay, so hopefully you guys can see my screen now. Looks like it. I'll try and zoom in here a little bit. All right, so the first thing we need to do, right, is kind of decide what type of work this sub-project is going to be focused on, what's inside of scope and what's outside of scope. So this document helps provide guidance on what things we should be focusing on. And it's also something that we can change and evolve over time. So we can always start with something that's a little bit tighter, and as we new things come up 6 months or a year from now, we decide that we're ready to start tackling those. We can always go back to the foundation and ask to increase the amount of scope that we have, so we can focus on those items as well. But right now, this is kind of what the project at least is initially set up to kind of look for. So right now, we can the primary focus is going to be focused on the standardization and definition of critical interfaces, operational parameters, environmental conditions that enable a non-proprietary multi-vendor supply chain. So that's the primary goal for this. And so, here's some of the things that we could consider, right? Things like direct liquid, immersion cooling, compressed air solutions. And then at the end, right, our once we completed a work product, right, the goal is to deliver a supply chain that offers these types of solutions to the end users. So the goal is to not just create specifications for entertainment purposes, right? We're actually looking to help drive adoption within the greater community. So here's kind of where we need to start with some of our discussion, right? We can open this up to the floor, right? So here's some of the in-scope activities that, the foundation's interested in, right? Weighted materials, physical properties, conditions and parameters, metrology of heat extraction, DC to rack interfaces, facility water loops, hot plug dripless valves, and cold plate attachment methods. So this is mostly focused on, in my opinion, this is more focused on the direct cooling. So I'm just going to open this up to community. Is there other broad activities that, in your opinion, we should be including inside the scope of this project? I know there's quite a few people here.
Steve, it looks like
Go ahead.
From Rolf. In the chat, he's asking if you can elaborate on the exclusion of rear door solutions.
So that's a good question. So the reason that is excluded right this second is because we weren't sure if there was enough value in working on this particular solution that required the development of a particular specification to support it. So I've actually heard from several different companies that feel that there's definitely some work that needs to get done in this area. Maybe the scope's not very large, but it should be included in part of the scope, at least for more of your medium-sized customers. So that's a great question. What do you guys think? Should this be something? Is there enough interest from you, the community, to go off and develop specifications to help enable rear door chillers for open rack solutions? There's plenty of stuff out there for EIA solutions. What about the open rack in particular?
Hi, this is Rolf Brink. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. Go right ahead.
All right, cool. Yeah, the reason why I asked this question is if we're looking at standardization of interfaces from the data center to the rack for water infrastructures, these type of these type of cooling architectures, from my opinion, should also be included. I mean, if you're looking at data center implementations where the rear door coolers are applied, you don't want to have different standards for the rear door coolers and for other liquid infrastructures. So it seems logical to me if you want to move towards a hybrid environment or a complete end-to-end solution for infrastructures to include all sorts of liquid infrastructures. That's from my point of view.
Yeah, this is Ed Fontana. I don't know if you guys can hear me, but yeah, my view is that it sounds like he's saying, hey, you're going to plug a coolant feed onto different things. And so if you're plugging it onto a piece of equipment that's in the rack, or if you're plugging it onto a cooler that's a rear chiller door cooler, can that plug interface be identical or controlled by this committee? I think that's what he's saying.
That's correct.
I agree with that. Yeah. I think that there's a great deal of convergence between the list of in-scope activities and their application of rear door heat exchanger. I think that should look the same regardless of what type of cooling is used inside of the rack. Rear door heat exchanger should be included in that, in my opinion.
Okay, so unless somebody disagrees with that, I'm of the same opinion. So I think I would move that we go ahead and move that into an in-scope activity. I think the amount of work that's required around that's relatively modest. I think most of it has to do with making sure that the interfaces between that and the external DC is the same. So I agree with you guys. So unless somebody disagrees with that, I'm going to.
This is Dale. Steve, this is Dale Sarger, LBL. I have a few comments. The first one is I think we're mixing up in this in-scope activity. There's some high-level in-scope activities like rear door versus on-plate. And then within each one of those categories, there would be another set of in-scope activities. So, for example, the hot plug dripless valves wouldn't relate to rear door heat exchangers, or typically might not. So it seems like the in-scope activity, we need to separate the high-level in-scope from the lower-level in-scope. And I have specific comments on the DC to rack interfaces, facility water. I mean, I think what you're talking about is the facility to the CDU interface. And in our group, we decided that CDUs are put all sorts of different places. They can be done at the data center level, at the row level, or at the rack level. You happen to pick out rack, but in many cases, the CDU is not in the rack, so the interface with the facility water is not at the rack. So I'm worried about the wording there. And I'm also worried about the wording on recommended cold plate attachment method. We looked at the frontier or the boundary being the server, so the connection would be to the server, not necessarily to the cold plate. So it's just some wordsmithing that I would suggest.
Hey Steve, this is I'm a research hour, so just to compare. Yeah.
Bill, are you trying to talk or? I can't hear you.
Well, you're not coming through very clearly at all.
Yeah.
Let's mute him for the time being so we can continue our conversation, and then I'll ping him separately.
Okay, no problem. Thanks, Archana.
Yep.
Okay, so yes, I agree that there's definitely some, more important parts of the scope and some less important parts of the scope. At this point, we're just trying to decide, what is the breadth of what we're working on, and then the next step after this is breaking down what are the different work streams and which one's the most important, which ones are less important. So at this point, we can decide where those boundaries are for some of the stuff later, whether we're actually going to do cold plate attachment methodologies or stop basically at somewhere at the rear wall of the server. We can decide that later unless we're absolutely confident that the cold plate attachment inside the server is definitely something we do not want to work with.
Hi, this is Mark Springer, Intel. Also, there's I guess another subsystem, the in-rack manifolding and fluid distribution, not just prior to the IT equipment, might be a category.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that real quick?
The in-rack manifolding and fluid distribution.
Yes, absolutely. That's probably that's probably something we should probably specifically state in the in-scope activity. That seems.
Yeah, I think we need to be careful about creating activities that take away opportunities for innovation. And I'm concerned when we start to get into defining CDUs in the rack that we're touching on solution provider innovation.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Bill. So we want to make sure that we're defining interfaces between things so that people can go and innovate within those interfaces as much as possible. So we can build up standardization between the solutions as opposed to dictating what the solutions are. Okay, is there anything else?
There might sort of be. I don't know. This is Ed Fontana again. We have a water cooled power supply right now. And then this is called rack and power, and there's also the servers and a lot of things that getting cooled. I think most of the load is in the servers. And I was wondering, will there be any differentiation in here between power and servers? I don't think there needs to be, but I don't know enough about it to know. So I'm just posing up the question of if there will be any differentiation.
I think at least from my standpoint, we would prefer there not, it should be able to use the same infrastructure ideally. Does anybody else have an opinion on that?
I have an opinion in that I agree with you completely.
All right, thanks, Ed.
Okay.
Okay. I don't know why we would prefer it to not be that way. Maybe I don't understand it well enough, but it seems like we would all want to do all the components, no matter what they are, in the same methodology if it's at all possible. So we would probably follow that path until we know that it's broken. Okay,
and I guess the follow-on question, I don't know if it's the right time, just tell me to talk later if it's not. Okay, so we have this power supply that we've been making for a while. It's got cooling feeds right on the front. Is that something that we would say, hey, this is what we're using, and we could suggest it as a benchmark connection device, and we could see how it compared to other things? Is that a reasonable approach going forward?
I'm sorry, Ed. I'm not following you.
Okay, we already have a product that does this, and it has a connection on the front. Yeah,
okay.
water cooled power supply, and it has a connection on the front. And I was wondering if we just offered up, hey, this is what we use. Would this work? Is that a mechanism that this committee would be open to?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's can be lots of different ways that these functions are already done in industry, right? We would as to selecting which one's the correct interface, the correct way to do it, or the preferred way to do it is something that each of those work streams will have to decide, how best to approach that.
Okay, so I think I'll take an action item to show you how we do it, and put that down there as a straw man or a reference, basically a straw man. And then
Sure.
what we want is the best way, but having a straw man to work from often accelerates progress.
Okay. So just kind of summarizing what I've heard so far is, we need to adjust the wording of the rear chiller, or let's say the placement of the CDU and interfaces to a rack level door. Mention the in-rack manifolds certainly being within scope. We can decide whether it's it's something we want to attack now or later, but it certainly could potentially be inside of scope. Is there anything else that I'm missing real quick before we move on?
So Steve, is the rear chiller door interface a subset of another project or another aspect? In other words, can we define an interface that's common with like direct plate cooling?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I think that would be the goal. That's the reason we'd be moving that into the in-scope activities, so that interface would be the same.
Okay.
I think that was the primary feedback we got from the community. That's why they want that included, because they want that interface to be the same, which I think is great. Actually, how what's actually going on inside the door can be, whatever, but the interfaces would be fine. So.
Yeah, so Steve, this is Austin. Another thought I'm just asking out loud: does the scope want to include the data center side of the liquid distribution network in terms of speeds and feeds that come to each one of the rack positions, definitions for pipe sizing and the branch definitions, et cetera? Is that beyond the scope here? Just really want to focus on the interface between the data center and the rack.
So
my original thought was that we wanted to define the parameters that the data center.
I'm sorry, Bill. I think you cut out there.
Yeah, Bill, we're losing you again. I can speak for Bill. I'm for sure I understand. So his initial, take on this was that yes, we would want to define some of those, speed to feeds from the data center side, because that's going to drive a lot of the upstream solutions or parameters that we're using. The actual, say, methodology that the water is, how that gets done could be something that's done later or part of the data center. Or, to me, that's more of a, that's not necessarily inside of the scope. So we can make that kind of in scope and out of scope. So in scope would be kind of the speeds and feeds and parameters of what's coming in from the data center, but not necessarily the specifics of how that's getting pumped around would be perhaps out of scope. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, we don't want to be overly prescriptive. I'm more thinking, I think, along the lines of, if we've got, chunk sizes at 10 kilowatts, 20 kilowatts, 50 kilowatts per rack, et cetera, there's some definitions around the types of piping infrastructure that we need to support that, right? So it's not just an environment where a data center's plumbed out half-inch pipe for a 50 kilowatt rack, right? And there's just not really enough flow rate. Those kind of things, I think we can help solve some of the ambiguity around planning for liquid instantiations. But without being overly prescriptive, as you mentioned.
Yeah. Okay. I think I agree with that. So, is anybody that disagrees with that as kind of a reasonable break in the scope? Okay. All right. In that case, yeah, let's add that in as well. speeds and feeds from the, water distribution from the DC will be in, and outside of scope would be the, the specifics of how that water is getting moved around within the DC, the way the pumps are and the like.
Of course, when you say that, Steve, it makes me think, I mean, do we need to extend definitions of resiliency to the way that water is delivered in terms of N+1 pumping on the infrastructure side or secondary water loops to compensate when a grid goes down or things like that? Is that
sure?
Maybe that is something we should talk about a little bit too.
So to me, that's more of the data center level requirements or preferences as opposed to, I mean, is there anything within there that would drive anything from the rack level up, right? I mean, are you going to change pipe size based on your N+1, or I mean, the interface types between CDUs and what's going upstream based on any of those parameters?
So I'm thinking, again, this is there are, I don't know if anybody on the call is from these groups. There are a handful of groups that sell solutions where they actually bring in two different water supplies into a given cold plate, so they have loop redundancy. They're not overly popular, but there are a couple of companies doing it that I'm aware of. I'm not sure if that should be included or not. But then again, the resiliency definition is something that I think a lot of other groups have struggled to characterize when we talk about facility redundancy for power delivery, for airflow redundancy within the data center. We don't necessarily talk about the pump structure and when a pump loop may go offline or need to be serviced. I think that there should be some definitions there, because ultimately the goal here is to help on the data center planning side, right, to make sure that a tier 3 or tier 4, tier 5 data center is consistent with those definitions, even when using cold plate liquid cooling technology. And I think that barrier hasn't been crossed yet.
Okay. So that seems reasonable. I think we probably would put that on, say, we can certainly include that in part of the scope, but probably, lower down in priority.
I would just generalize it as a data center. So speeds and feeds definitions, I think, should be in scope, and then a lower priority categorization on data center water resiliency.
Okay. Does anybody else?
Yeah, John Bean here, Schneider Electric. I do have a little bit of a question, right? And I get the dialogue around what's in scope, and I think that's really important. But one of the things that I'm used to focusing on a little bit on standards and efforts like this is to really get a clear definition of what our purpose is here. And, the clear, unambiguous purpose can really help guide us as to what's in scope and out of scope. And I guess just sitting here with the first 30 minutes on this call, it's not crystal clear, and I apologize that it's not, but it's not crystal clear to me what the end goal purpose of this activity is, and I'm wondering if somebody has captured that, and it's just something that I just need to go and read, or if there's any thoughts on that.
So right now, the only the only thing we've got right now is just this paragraph up here that describes, in general, the harmonization of liquid cooling componentry, right, in order to enable a multi-vendor supply chain, which is very broad, right? So I agree with you. I think as we go forward, kind of a next step for what we're going to be doing would be to kind of break these down into smaller chunks, because there's quite a bit of scope of work, right? And it's going to be very different between, if you're doing a CU versus an immersion. So as we start breaking these down, we can start helping better define kind of the scope of some of the work that needs to get done. But so.
Yeah, I capture your comment, and I think perhaps, there could be the opportunity for the overview to kind of tweak the language and make it more of a purpose statement than an overview, and that might help guide us all a little bit referring back basically the purpose being more or less the mission of the activity, right?
Sure. So I mean, we could break that out. What other information, right, or definition around that do you think would be beneficial to us?
Well, I think, trying to state the end objective, what we're trying to facilitate with it a little bit more clearly, and I noticed a little bit further down, we were talking about standardization of critical interfaces, right, and operational parameters, but I guess, I guess that's just so loose right now that I'm a little bit worried we could lose our way as we move forward without maybe trying to give a little bit better definition of what we intend to accomplish here, right? And maybe it's just not clear to me, but maybe other folks share that view, just jumping into it here, their first exposure.
Sure.
I have a kind of I have a kind of question that might help with this subject. Okay, so when I heard or read the part about supply chain, what I heard was the goal is to establish a legitimate supply chain so that vendors can use water-cooled solutions and get the elements they need to execute that through a valid end-to-end supply chain. So that seemed to me to be a pretty clearly stated goal that's actually pretty useful. And so I don't know if that, I guess my question is, if that became more prominent as the stated goal, would that meet your request?
Yeah, I think if it becomes a bit more prominent, and again, I'm jumping into this late, my first exposure to it, but I just, when I hear all these conversations that we're talking about within scope, I'm kind of curious how they really tie into the supply chain element of it that was stated here, right? When we start talking out beyond the racks and all, so I'm just a little bit curious on tweaking and tuning the purpose of what we have to make sure it's kind of our guiding light through the activity.
Sure, I think that's good, and I'm sure at this point all of us have a slightly different opinion on what that goal might be. So certainly by tweaking the scoping document some to help make that a little bit more, the goal a little bit more focused would certainly help. So you shouldn't feel like you're behind on this, right? All of us are just meeting kind of the first time on this, so everybody's kind of on the same page right now as we're just now kicking this off. So I can certainly take a stab at updating the charter to kind of take the stated goal and make it more clear. Is there anything else anybody else would like to see related to the very specifics around that goal that you don't think are currently in the document, or would help clarify kind of our overarching goal?
Yeah, this is Rolf Ring speaking from Asperitas. I would be quite interested in adding a topic to the list when it comes to immersion technology, and more specifically towards design guidelines for server systems which are optimized for liquid flow. And for liquid, the current practices when it comes to immersion technology is that air design servers are simply tossed into a liquid environment, whereas a lot of benefit in designing a server environment in a slightly different way, the actual physical server, the main board, or the layout of the components, to allow optimized liquid flow and heat rejection.
Okay, I think that's good. I think that's very important as well, specifically around immersion, because you're gonna have, in order to take advantage of it, you really need a different server design. So,
this is Jessica.
I'm sorry?
Hi, this is Jessica. I just wanted to add one thing as well. So I think that what would be, we have on here of metrology of heat extraction performance, but I think it's important to also establish other metrologies as part of this ongoing effort as well, in order to determine, for example, if it's very different if you're talking about liquid cooled systems versus immersion. And if you're looking at vetted materials for liquid cooling, that can be a very more of a limited list versus if you're talking about immersion, where I'm sure that it will be a lot of materials that are specific to one particular solution. So determine some kind of metrology in order to determine of what the material impacts or material interaction between different materials, I think would be of importance as well.
Okay, so not just the heat extraction performance, but I mean, we already have the fluid physical properties and types. Wouldn't that fall within that as part of?
Can we add metrology to that too, then, of how to do it, right? That we're making sure that it's done, that we're suggesting a metrology and how to do it, because I think there's so many different ways of doing it today. There's no standards in that either.
There's no standards covering what specifically?
Of how to determine what the material interactions are.
That's basically due to the variation of different liquid technologies. Huh? So, if I understand you correctly, we got different type of liquids, different type of cooling infrastructures when it comes to immersion, where all these electronic components are interfacing directly with liquid, and there are different aspects with different technology implementations and also different liquids, which adds a lot of complexity in material compatibility research. And this is something that we're actually currently on parallel addressing these topics with a different collaboration with several advanced cooling companies to establish some of these standards as well. So we'll make sure to feed that into the OCP group as well.
Okay, I mean, I certainly believe that all of that would definitely be in scope activities. So we can certainly add the word metrology into that, in scope statement. So it's not just covering the definition of it, but the metrology portion of it, if we would like to do that. There's people that are interested in working and defining that.
I think it's quite relevant when it comes to manufacturers who want to start looking at immersion technology to get a clear view of all this. So I think it might warrant some special attention.
So what you're saying is that we would need to develop, whether it's a white paper or a specification on the methodology to determine call it a safe fluid for this particular purpose. Is that what you're saying?
Well, not so much the fluids, but more towards server design, chip, the way to deal with components, electronic components, or how to create interfaces within the different liquids. Yes, a white paper approach could be very appropriate for that, or at least towards a set of guidelines when it comes to dealing with liquids.
Okay, so in my mind, that falls easily within the scope of that first line, right? Determination of the wetted materials, right? So whether that's on the fluid, or that would be directly related to the type of materials that for an emergent case, the actual electronics, right?
I think that initial question got kind of blended into several questions along the way, but I agree that's with Steve that I think you're talking about chemical compatibility with different wetted materials for different fluid types, and I think that's captured in the first bullet. But then the original question I think was geared towards metrology of heat extraction performance, and if I'm not mistaken, I think the goal would probably be to abstract the heat performance analysis so that it is consistent across different cooling technologies. Right, and so there is a data center side heat efficiency or heat removal efficiency metric that can be applied to the different types of cooling that are supported within the guides of this OCP group. Is that a true statement?
We definitely need that as well, but yeah, my comment was mainly regarding establishing guidelines for metrology of how to test as customers or users are getting into different type of liquids, different type of materials that they're using. We won't be able to cover all of those, right? Of saying that all of these are safe materials for you to use in this particular instantiation. They will all potentially use different liquids, different materials. We need to be able to provide some type of metrology of how to test it.
Okay, so I can
Specifically,
easily
how to test what though, Jessica? Just to be very concrete.
Material compatibility.
So
Right? If there are any potential.
Is the goal of this to create a definition for establishing material compatibility?
Yes.
And I mean, that seems more of a research focus than but I could be wrong. That seems more academic and research in nature. But
yes and no. I mean, there are practical sides of things. When it comes to immersion, you've got the two-phase approach where 3M is doing some really good stuff, and there are different oil-based solutions where we are, among others, active in. And the type of materials that you apply in these environments can be different, will behave differently. And actually, it's not very big rocket science. But when it comes to how to deal with establishing which components can or cannot be used, there should be. I think there's plenty of knowledge out there by now that will allow us to define some kind of best practices and manufacturing guidelines for server systems, which will allow the creation of servers which are compatible with a whole range of liquids. So that manufacturers don't need to test 100 different types of liquids with 100 different types of chips.
I tend to agree that there's lots of research and information available today based upon empirical testing that's already occurred in this space for a number of different fluids, and that should be leveraged and included and should be part of that first bullet. But I don't, again, I'm just asking the question, but that doesn't seem like it would be part of the scope to define the test method by which somebody would establish credible chemical compatibility, right? Because some of that takes months or even years for certain parasitic interactions to surface.
Yeah, but I think it's probably part of a best practices approach, and so not so much as a definite standard, but at least as a best practices, so that any components that are vetted will or that are determined compatible, that they have gone through a certain type of standard best practice approach for testing and validating it.
Well, validation best practices make sense to me. Yeah, you're not doing the chemical compatibility research though, or you're not instructing OEMs or vendors to go and that should be. I think that should be done elsewhere, in my opinion. But,
yeah. So from my standpoint, this would be a great place. As we gather that information, right? OCP is a great way to document best practices, share best practices as part of your contribution. That's it could also be test protocols if we think we can get that far, but it's kind of up to you guys to decide where the line gets drawn. Certainly, the types of things that you're talking about are certainly well within OCP's interests. Okay, is there anything else in terms of kind of in scope or out of scope activities or changes to this particular document for now? Okay. So what I will do is I will open up this document so that anybody with the link can edit it, and I will send a link out as part of the out of the notes for today. And so all of us can kind of go in there and start playing around with the particular specifics that are in there. And then hopefully by the next time we meet, we can at least be comfortable that the scoping document is pretty close to what we want, and we can maybe bring it up next time and see if there's any other additional changes that need to be made. And that way we as a community kind of converge on this, because these are all great discussions. So this is exactly what I was kind of hoping to get through today. So we've only got 8 minutes left. I was really hoping that we could take the next step to kind of start breaking this up into work streams. I don't think we can make a whole lot of progress on that right now, the limited time that we have left. So I think what I would propose is that we essentially set up our schedule to meet next time, kind of maybe work on our agenda for next time that we meet. So right now I've got it scheduled for the same time slot 2 weeks from now. So let me open that up for you guys now, while we're still trying to batten down the scoping activities that seem reasonable, at least for the majority of the group. Okay, so in that case, what I will do is we'll go ahead and keep the meeting for 2 weeks from now. For agenda items, right, we will essentially hopefully close on the project scoping document like I'm showing here, so that then I can take it back to
for record, which tells us the most about
I'm sorry? Go ahead.
I think that was a mistake, Steve.
Oh, maybe so. Okay, thanks, Caleb. So we can get the scoping document basically clarified and solidified. The next step for that would be for me to take it back to the foundation and get them to ratify it, that they agree that this seems like a reasonable scope for this subgroup. And then hopefully we can spend the bulk of our time in our next meeting breaking this down into some different workflows, and then kind of hopefully prioritizing some of those workflows so that we can then start, decide the best path forward to establishing, meetings could be potentially, several meetings, one for each workflow. How the way to kind of drive the groups forward, get the different workflows identified, and start coming up with more specific work products that we can generate. Does anybody have any kind of feedback on that plan going forward?
Hey, Steve, this is Archna. I just wanted to just make a comment that this call was recorded. So if anyone in your organizations wasn't able to attend, that it'll be posted on the wiki. I think either by the end of today or tomorrow, and you can go back and also listen to the recording and or send the recording to colleagues that might be interested in attending. Because I know we covered a lot today.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Thank you, Archana. So, this is still a really good time to get people from your organizations involved as we start this process going forward. Nobody on the call is going to be an expert across everything that this subproject is going to touch, right? So we need experts from lots of different areas, and working together if we're going to drive these to some sort of productive conclusion. So at this point, we've got 4 minutes left. I think we're comfortable with the agenda items, at least for next week. Is there any other questions essentially from anyone or concerns that you'd like to bring up, since we've got 3-4 minutes left.
Yeah, I have a question, Rolf Brink again. And it's mostly related to how we've never taken part in an OCP group yet, simply because we're involved in immersion, and it hasn't been part of OCP so far. What is the practical way of feeding information into OCP, into a work group, or is it just by sending information directly to a mailing list, or is there a different way of feeding or discussing how information can be inserted into the group, or
sure,
to get proposals in?
Yes, great. So that's a great question. So the mailing list is going to be your primary method for sharing with the greater group. As work product comes out, if you'll send that through the mailing list, the work products can be posted on the OCP wiki so that everybody can see them and review that work product, hopefully, ideally prior to everybody getting together and meeting. So that's really the best way to feed information into the docs. We prefer working in open collaboration tools, such as Google Docs, so that we can post the information and allow multiple people to collaborate in real time. But that's if you're we could also have situations where a particular company has expertise in a particular area and they want to go off and develop something and propose that back to the group through whether it's a specification or a white paper, right? That one individual might do all the work and then push that back into the subgroup through the mailing list. So the mailing list is really your primary method of transferring information among your working peers. So you've got two mailing lists, one for the rack and power and one for advanced cooling. So the advanced cooling, since there's probably lots of rack and power that aren't necessarily as interested in it, so you don't need to necessarily post it to both, right? This particular group can just use that advanced cooling mailing list to let people know that work product is available. It'll also be the way we do agenda items. So, for example, if you go off and develop a proposal for something, right, you would request from the sub-project lead, on the agenda, right? I've got this. I would like to share it. Can I get 20 minutes on next week's agenda, right? So that's where your project lead would kind of help, gather those requests and drive that agenda forward. Does that answer your question? Was there other openings that maybe I didn't cover?
Well, yeah, it's to a point, because there's quite a lot that we can share that we would like to bring to the table in OCP, and I want to prevent spamming everyone with too much information.
So if you've got a lot of information that you would like to share, right? You can just send me an email or Caleb an email, and we can push all of the information up onto our share, then post the link, and then I can send you the link, and then you can basically elaborate on all the information that's up there, and let people know what's there, what's available, and we can go from there. Does that sound better?
Yeah, good for me.
Okay. Yeah, if you've got a lot of stuff, just for me right now I'm your sub project lead. But later on, you would talk directly to whoever that sub project lead is. So we'll pick out some sub project leads after we get some sort of idea of what the scope of the workflows are going to be, so that we can get people involved in running each of those workflows, probably. Just because the scope of the work is going to be, I suspect, relatively large. So we're running over time right now, but I can stay on for a few more minutes and ask another question if there's anybody that's interested. If anybody has any other question, I've got another 3 or 4 minutes. But that's a great question. Thanks for bringing that up, Rolf. Okay, no problem. So thanks everybody for joining us today. Again, I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions and other points that people like to make. So feel free to get those on the mailing list, and I will send out links for editing the scoping document, as well as the links to the notes from today's meetings. And I look forward to talking to you guys again in another 2 weeks. So thanks, everybody.